It was April 2009. Dawn Drexel of Chile, New York, receives a life-altering call that would begin the 13-year-long search for her missing daughter. Little did Dawn know, her 17-year-old daughter, Brittanee Drexel, wasn't staying a few days at a friend's house in nearby Rochester like she had told her mother. In fact, she was last seen over 800 miles away in the popular spring break destination, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. However, at that point, no one could be certain exactly where she was. So what did happen to Brittanee? Who did it? And how did it take over a decade to solve this case? We'll dive into the unanswered questions and theories in this tragic mystery. Join us for another Bad Things true crime case, the disappearance of Brittanee Drexel. Drexel grew up in a small upstate New York town outside of Rochester. She was always the star of the family and had a big personality even as a small child. Her parents were only teenagers when she was born, which made their relationship complicated. The couple split up when Brittanee was young, and her father moved to Tampa, Florida, while she stayed with her mother outside Rochester, New York. It wasn't until Brittanee was 16 years old that she would begin spending time with her father, John Kaiaulu. Little did he know that only after a year reuniting with his daughter again, she'd disappear and he'd tragically never see her again. Leading up to her disappearance, Brittanee had warned her daughter against going down to Myrtle Beach for spring break. After having a premonition of her daughter's imminent danger, she insisted the teen would get hurt, but Brittanee refused to believe it. Finally, it seemed, Brittanee had moved on from the idea, but in reality, she had secretly made other plans. A friend of hers pretended to be a fellow parent, calling Dawn to explain that Brittanee would be coming over to stay for a few days in Rochester. Instead, Brittanee and her friends drove down to Myrtle Beach to celebrate spring break. She continued to lie to her mother Dawn about her whereabouts right up until the day she went missing. On April 24, 2009, Dawn talked to her daughter for the last time. Brittanee told her mother that she was hanging out with friends and they were about to watch a movie. She told her she would see her tomorrow and that she loved her. When tomorrow came, Dawn learned of her daughter's fate in the most horrifying way imaginable. On the 25th, Dawn received a call from John Greco. John was Brittanee's boyfriend and had stayed back in Rochester while she and her friends went on the trip. He explained to Dawn that Brittanee was in Myrtle Beach, but they had been unable to find her. When Dawn heard the news, she immediately felt deep in her heart that this decision may have cost her daughter's life. The boyfriend, John, was one of the first to realize something must have gone wrong. She had strangely stopped returning texts despite active communication throughout that time. None of her friends had seen her since the previous night. While Dawn and the others tried calling her over and over, there was no response. At that point, she decided to take matters into her own hands. She jumped in her car and began the almost 14-hour drive south. John also packed up and began heading north. When John and Dawn arrived in Myrtle Beach, spring break partying was well underway. Still, their daughter was nowhere to be seen. Her dad, John, kept revisiting a recent conversation he had with his daughter. She had asked him what he would think about her running away with a rich guy. Local police began working the case. They found video footage of the last time Brittanee was seen. On the tape, she's walking out of the lobby of the hotel where her friend was staying. This friend, Peter Brazowitz, claims she came to his hotel to pick up a pair of flip-flops she had left in his car. Roadside security cameras were able to capture her also leaving the hotel and walking down the sidewalk toward the main road. Police started their interviews with Peter since he was the last known person to have seen Brittanee. After interviewing Peter, police turned to her three other friends, who had no idea what could have happened to her. Ultimately, they began working with Brittanee's cell phone provider to determine its last known location. They used cell phone pings based on the distance from the cell tower to determine where it was last seen. Police were shocked to find the cell phone was last pinged 50 miles south in a rural town called McClellanville. The phone had died in the early morning hours of April 26th. Searches of the area began, but the terrain was difficult to navigate. The land around McClellanville is a dense and desolate part of the Low Country. Authorities and volunteers were forced to search the area by horseback, ATV, and foot. Police and volunteers exhausted their search of the area but came back with nothing. Dawn's mother was forced to come to the conclusion that she may never find or see her daughter ever again. It wasn't until 7 years later that another breakthrough in the case would come. An inmate at a prison confessed to the FBI that he had witnessed the kidnapping and murder of Brittanee Drexel years prior. While the accused denied any information of the crime by the inmate, the FBI would now consider the case a homicide. While they continued to pursue the suspect accused by the inmate, it ultimately led to little result. Prior to this part of the investigation, authorities had also been investigating another suspect, but had little information to charge him at that point. It was back in 2011. Investigators were granted a search warrant for a motel room in Georgetown, South Carolina. This motel room is where Raymond Moody, a registered sex offender, had been staying at the time of Brittanee Drexel's disappearance. According to reports, Moody was back in his hometown of Georgetown, South Carolina, after having been convicted and serving almost 20 years of his 40-year sentence in a California prison for multiple assaults. In 2011, police first caught wind of Moody when searching through the local sex offender registry. Not only that, but Moody had also been pulled over for a traffic violation near Myrtle Beach the day after Brittanee Drexel vanished, which would place him within the vicinity of the crime. According to Chuck Capp, a former Myrtle Beach police officer who pulled him over, Moody had scratches on his face and head. Also, another witness who encountered Moody claims he saw that his face had claw marks all over it, his neck, his cheeks. He had a shaved bald head. His head was just clawed. Still, the case would ultimately go cold once more until years later. In early May of 2022, Moody would pop up again. This time, he was turning himself into the police at the Georgetown County Sheriff's Office on the basis of an obstruction of justice charge. Moody explained everything to the police. He confessed to the crime on May 4th, to be exact. Not only that, but he showed authorities the location of potential remains in a nearby swampy area. The FBI excavated them over the next few days. By May 11th, human remains were found in the area. They had been buried in the woods off a gated private drive outside Georgetown and were approximately 4 feet into the ground. The FBI confirmed through DNA analysis and by using dental records on May 15th that the remains did belong to Brittanee Drexel. Forensic scientists determined that the cause of death was likely strangulation before she was buried on the morning of April 26, 2009. The Georgetown County Sheriff's Office and Drexel's family made the information public the next day, which was followed by the announcement of Moody's arrest. Raymond Moody was arrested once more and charged with murder, kidnapping, and first-degree criminal sexual misconduct, which was alleged to have all occurred on the day of Drexel's disappearance. On October 19, 2022, Moody pleaded guilty to all charges. The judge sentenced him to life in prison with an additional 2 consecutive terms of 30 years. The news was tragic and heartbreaking to the Drexel family and friends. It had been 13 long years before fully knowing what had happened to Brittanee. While this information would bring closure to the family, they will surely face a painful road ahead as they continue to live without their daughter. Had Brittanee Drexel not taken the fateful trip that day, she may be 31 years old as of 2023.